over to Laura Tannage and Alex Edwards. Alex is volunteer learning and development advisor at London Museum, and Laura is secondary schools program manager at London Museum also, and they both jointly manage a Museum of London work experience program. Normally this program would take place at the museum throughout the summer for 14 to 18-year-olds. As a result of the pandemic this year, they worked to transition the program into an online offer for students between the ages of 14 and 18. So I'm now going to hand over to them. Welcome, thank you for coming along today. It must have been an interesting experience to change your program and turn it to a digital program.
It sure was, yeah. I'm just going to share my screen and get our presentation up, so hopefully everyone can see that.
Yep.
Perfect. Laura?
Yes, I'll start. So we're going to talk about a couple of different areas today. So we're going to start off with what our work experience was like, how we transitioned it into online, how we did that, what we learned from that, and then some top tips at the end. So work experience at the Museum of London is jointly managed between HR and learning. So Alex and I are essentially the work experience leads. It's an ACE funded programme, and that budget sits within ACE, as sits within HR, as does the target for work experience. So our aim is to get 24 students each summer. We're quite lucky that it sits within two different strategic objectives for the organisation, which is to engage every school child and to reach more people. So it really fits quite well that it's within both. And the ultimate aim of our work experience is to kind of make that career pipeline and to start diversifying the workforce. So hopefully young people join us at work experience when they're 14 to 18-year-olds. They then transition into a volunteering role, and then they might be able to transition into a paid role. We have work experience champions that sit across each of the departments in the museum. So these might be people who are really interested in working with young people, or they want to gain more experience from managing, or they need help with extra tasks. So we're really lucky that we have about 15 departments across the museum that are already engaged and interested in work experience. And for the young people to attend, they need to attend an insight day that covers what a group induction would do for a normal employee. And the work experience champions deliver these presentations. They talk about their career pathways, and then the young people have an opportunity to talk with them with a Q&A after. And we've also piloted our work experience with SEND students and looked after young people and care leavers. These are much smaller programs, and these often take place in the autumn term, whereas we're doing a comparison with what happened in summer term. So we just wanted to give you an example of how work experience has transitioned over the last few years. So really over the last 4 years, it's grown quite massively. And we have seen a big interest. So we've got between sort of 80 people joining us on the Insight Day and about 20 students joining us for the work experience weeks themselves. Although in 2019, we had about 40 young people join us for work experience, which is just amazing. And we did realise that maybe 40 was a bit too many, and we're going to scale that back again. But our work experience programme has really grown over the last few years. And we didn't have any aim when we transitioned to an online work experience, but just to give you an idea of the numbers, 52 young people participated in our online programme, and that was 131 attendees per session. So lots of the young people attended multiple times. To give you some context of how we were transitioning from our in-person programme into this online programme, we had already started the process of planning our 2020 work experience programme when the museum closed to the public on the March 19th. And we had about 100 young people who had expressed an interest to join us for work experience in the Insight Day. So we were already on that pathway of, it's quite a quick pathway of moving from the expressions of interest into getting to our work experience programme. But we had to have lots of meetings and lots of planning, and we had come to the conclusion quite quickly that we might be able to do sort of a hybrid programme where some of it was online and some of it was in person. But I was going back through kind of our emails and what we were researching to start off with. So the museum closed to the public on the 19th of March, and then we had already made the decision by the 17th of April that we were abandoning our plans and we had to do something new. So at this point, we had EB sign off to kind of transition our whole programme online. And at this point, we sent through a survey to the young people, which is Alex is going to talk about in a minute. And then from then, we had up until the 22nd of June, which is when the programme started, to make all those changes. So we're really proud that we managed to turn this around quite quickly. But just to give you an idea of how we went from thinking we were going to do something in person to then jump into totally online in a very short amount of time. But Alex is going to talk about what we actually did.
Alex, you're on mute. Sorry, thank you so much. I was really worried about interrupting Laura and now interrupting myself. So as Laura mentioned, we were incredibly fortunate that we'd already received applications for the Insight Day from the students. So we could send a survey out to them to find out what they wanted from these online sessions. And that way we could build the sessions around what would be most useful for them so that it was as relevant as possible. So the results from the survey showed us that everyone had access to the internet, so they'd be able to attend online sessions, because that was one of our concerns, that people may not be able to access them. The sessions should be about an hour in length. It should be a series of sessions with different content in each, rather than one long kind of big session. The sessions should take place in the afternoon, not really much surprise there with 14 to 18-year-olds. And that the top 3 topics that came up that the young people were most interested in were finding out about skills needed for working in museums, having access to speakers across a variety of museum departments, so different museum staff, and having the opportunity to do practical activities. So onto what we created. Firstly, to mention, we had a really incredible response from our work experience champions across the museum, and this resulted in us being able to offer 10 different sessions, so essentially information on 10 different parts of the museum. And we ran these on afternoons over a 3-week period. So the format that the sessions took, for the majority of sessions, it started with a presentation from the work experience champion talking about their role, the skills that they use in their role, and their career pathway, so how they got to the role that they were in. There was then a Q&A section, which gave the students a chance to ask any questions they had. And then there was a task or activity for the students to undertake. And where possible, these were to be as close to a real life work task as we could make them, and perhaps something that they would have done had they been in the museum for work experience in person. For some of the sessions though, it wasn't possible to have that activity and that real life task. So for those, we advertised them more as information sessions, but we still tried to make them as interactive as possible. So that mainly related to sessions such as like HR, a session on apprenticeships, and a session about our Memories of London programme, which is a programme of activities supporting people living with dementia. So in these sessions, students were really encouraged to participate via the chat function or using the yes and no buttons in Zoom. So we thought it might be useful to share some of the examples of the activities that the students were undertaking. So there was quite a broad range of activities. Some of the examples you can see on the screen. I'm just going to touch on a couple of them to give you a bit of further information. So our Museum Development Office, they work really closely with London's non-national museums, offering advice and support. So the task for the students here was to review one of the non-national museums' websites and social media platforms, and feedback on different areas by filling in a form in a Word document. And that information could then be passed back to the non-national museums as part of the Museum Development Office's work. So a really great task that they would have done. Had they been to work experience, they probably would have gone to some of these museums in person. So a really nice kind of transition. One of our curators worked with the young people to encourage them to think about object label writing, but it was in more of a kind of a creative way. So getting the students to perhaps imagine that it was the object itself talking or telling a specific story related to the object rather than just listing what the object was and its qualities. And then our commercial services team, they had the young people looking at floor plans for events and setting up an event space with social distancing in mind. So it was very current. And they were also thinking about online public events. So things that we could run in response to our online collection and kind of sharing ideas for that as well. So we wanted to add a few other random bits of information, which I'm calling technical notes. So for anyone looking to actually kind of run something similar in future, this is kind of some more behind the scenes information and admin information, which I thought might be useful. So the platform we used to run the sessions was Zoom. As an organisation, the Museum of London, we were set up with free Zoom accounts at the beginning of the lockdown, and we were able to purchase a licence to access the longer sessions with our Arts Council funding, because we felt that Zoom would be the most accessible for the young people and offer us a choice of using breakout rooms as well, which actually in the end we didn't use, but it gave us a few more options. So our volunteer management system at the museum is Volunteer Impact. We'd used this already to collect the applications for the Insight Day. So we continued using the system and advertised the sessions through the system, and volunteers could then sign up to those sessions as well through their Volunteer Impact account. So it was a really nice way of keeping everything in a neat, nice place together. So with our work experience champions, in order to plan the sessions, we had at least 2 meetings with the work experience champions. Initially, we had one group meeting where we informed them of the results of the survey. And from there, they were asked to submit a sort of pro forma, which confirmed their availability and that the format of the session that they could offer. We then met with work experience champions individually to discuss this in more detail and flesh out their tasks. And then before the session, we had one more meeting actually on Zoom to kind of test run, go through any final questions and make sure they were happy with how their task would run, if they were doing a task. So for the tasks themselves, it kind of varied with each session. For some students, they were emailed before the session with any information that they needed for the task. And in others, they were maybe sent an email during the session. For some of them, it would have been a Word document that perhaps they were completing and emailing back to us. And for others, they may have simply popped their responses in the chat box. But in all cases, we would introduce the task on Zoom with the young people and go through it in person to ensure that everyone knew what they were doing. We did also ask the students to remain logged into Zoom while they were doing their task. And the task could have been up to 20 minutes. But they were kind of staying there so that they could ask us any questions if they had them, and we can keep them, be there for them if they needed us. And importantly, feedback on the tasks were also given to students. So they were really interested in having feedback on what they'd done. So either at the end of the session or by email afterwards, we provided feedback for their tasks. Safeguarding. So in the run up to the sessions, we spoke a lot about safeguarding because of running online sessions for young people, what we should and shouldn't be doing and how we could make it as safe as possible. So some of the things that we ended up doing were creating specific safeguarding guidance for both the students and the work experience champions. Our links to the Zoom sessions were sent out to the students the morning of the session, and they were reminded not to publish or share them with anyone else. Students were also asked to join the session with the name showing that they would have registered for. So on Zoom, their name should be the same as the name on our system, basically, and that meant that we could easily identify them in the waiting room and ensure we weren't letting anyone else in. Students could choose to have their cameras on or off. We had a process in place for what we would do if we were like Zoom bombed or lost connection, so everyone was really clear on how that would work. And we also made sure that we had 2 hosts in the session. So one would kind of be facilitating the session, and the other would be keeping an eye for any safeguarding concerns or helping with technical bits during the session. And finally, private messaging and screen sharing on Zoom were kind of turned off for extra security in that sense. And now back to Laura to talk about the impact.
So we were quite lucky in that we have a Mentimeter account at the museum. So we were able to evaluate each of the 10 sessions using Mentimeter at the end. And then a month after they participated in the online work experience, we sent them their certificates with a follow-up SurveyMonkey. And so this is just some of the results of the follow-up SurveyMonkey. So what we're really pleased to show is that we kind of met all the aims of the sessions. So those 3 things that Alex talked about at the beginning, which was talking to real people that work in museums, understanding the skills that they use and doing those tasks, were the 3 things we concentrated on from that talking from that initial survey of what they wanted. And it looks like that we did meet those kind of 3 areas. We've still got lots of work to do on what a real work task looks like over the internet, and we're still working on that. And we're actually running this online work experience again with one specific school at the moment, and even translating it onto a different platform. So we're using Google Meets this time. The tasks are taking we're using the same tasks, a different platform, and they're even harder to deliver. So there are lots of different variables when you're doing stuff online, including what platform you're using. And the other thing we just wanted to share is what the students did next. So whether they wrote it on their CV, they wrote it on their personal statement, and what they looked into, like different opportunities that they had. So we thought these were really interesting examples of the kind of data that we have to share. We've just got a few more slides for you. So the next one is thinking about these kind of overarching lessons that we've learned. So one of the things was we really struggled to track in our evaluation why sessions are poor or average. We couldn't really get a reason as to why this was, and we think that's because it was the online setting and you can't have that conversation with a person. They were very rarely marked poor or average, but we still wanted to interrogate that a bit more. Online sessions take up way more staff time than we expected. So not only did we have 2 hosts in the session, we had the work experience champion. Some departments have up to 3 work experience champions. So in some sessions, there were 6 members of staff in that session for an hour. And there was loads of planning that went into it as well. And having repeated the same process again, the same amount of planning needs to go into it. So there's not the same repetition that you get with in-person events. So there's still the same amount of planning, whereas in person, there's less planning the next time you do it. And the students were likely to participate with their cameras off, and it was super hard to get them to unmute and to speak loud. We've managed to adapt that though, and use the chat box in kind of really interesting ways, gamifying how we use the chat box to get young people to really think about what they're saying and how to participate. And we couldn't understand the participant expectations of what they wanted from us. This was particularly clear when we were given feedback on the tasks. So we would give general feedback for some tasks and individual feedback for others, depending on what kind of task it was. And the more sessions that the young people repeated, the higher their expectations became. But in actuality, we knew nothing about their capability, about their technical equipment they had at home. So it was really difficult for us to find that standard that we should be aiming for, because we knew nothing about the young people. And obviously, because it's online, you're always going to have some problems with the internet at some point. So we've got a couple of top tips that we thought would be useful to share with you based on what we've learned. So when you are screen sharing, particularly when you're working with young people, it's really nice if you can have another member of your team in the session for safeguarding to monitor the chat box and monitor any of the cameras that are on. And if you can't do that, and if you've got access to a second computer, to have that available so that you can do both at the same time, that would be great. We really found talking to our audience first was an amazing thing that we did, in that we did everything based on research and everything based on evidence from the audience. So we would really recommend talking to your audience first if you're going to try and engage them online. And finally, the biggest comment we got was to make everything interactive. And we kept trying to add more interactivity in. And we still don't know what the young people meant by make it more interactive. So we're continually trying to work towards that, but we have tried to like gamify the chat a bit. And for us, the next steps are, we're going to make the assumption that work experience is not going to be in person again for 2021. So we're now trying to think about whether we can have sort of like a hybrid or blended online and in-person kind of work experience. But we've only had one meeting about that so far, so we haven't got very far at all in that planning. If you do want to know more about our work experience programme, we've had an opportunity to put it in quite a few places. So there's loads of blogs you could read about what we did. So please feel free to go and check one of these out.
Brilliant. Thank you, Alex and Laura. That was really interesting to listen to, and especially within the context of turning that around from a planned physical work experience to a digital one in a matter of months. It's a fantastic achievement. I guess one question which is coming from Rhiannon was, how do you gamify the chat? I think we all would love to know. Probably not just for the work experience, but also for meetings.
So we did things like we would start a sentence and then get everyone to finish the sentence. So the Museum of London is, and then everyone would have to put in something in the chat box. What we have found though is that if we give a time span, so you've got a minute to think of something and everyone press enter at the same time, the fear of being the first person to press enter is lost. So if you give people that break. We've done missing word activities, so the same again, but rather than the blank being at the end, the blank being in the middle. We've done things that can link people together. So when we worked with the young people, care leavers and looked after young people, we played a game called Sun Shines On, which was a bit about like finding things in common. So you could use the yes and no button to find different young people. So we've done quite a few things like that as well. Oh, and the other one we was recommended, which I've never tried, is getting people to do physical movements if their cameras are on, but I have never tried that one.
Thank you. How did the museum reach out to students? Were they London schools, like further education ones? What was your strategy for reaching out to students?
I think generally in terms of the work experience itself, quite often it's students who actively seek us out and are looking for work experience. They tend to be the ones that kind of sign up and come through for the Insight Day. So for the online working experience itself, it was anyone who had already registered for the Insight Day. Those are the ones that we kind of targeted for the online work experience. But we had to kind of get their permission again. So we contacted everyone and said, this is what we'd like to do. If you'd like to participate, please confirm back to us. And here's a survey to complete. And from there, we kind of went from there.
Brilliant, thank you. I'll give you anyone. Does anyone else have any other questions before we close today's session? I do have one more whilst we wait for any other questions. And with your planning for next year, how do you, are you planning both options, or are you planning specifically to focus on digital?
We're still deciding. We're kind of we've had one meeting to discuss it so far, and like watching the news at every opportunity. I think we're kind of in our mind almost trying to plan for lots of different scenarios and have an idea of how we could react if everything shuts down again, if it looks like we can go ahead, you know, at what date do we have to make the decisions by, and that will kind of tell us how we go forward. But it is, I think, for the Insight Day, for example, we're kind of thinking, you know, that comes first. Does that have to be in person? You know, do we need to think about doing that online? So yeah, there's kind of different considerations.
Brilliant, thank you. And I think we've got one more question on how the sessions took place. Did people have to sign up to individual, or were they all just given the invites to each session. They just chose which ones they went to.
Yeah, sure. So we advertised the sessions individually, so as individual sessions. And I think we had 10 spaces, Laura. I can't remember now. It feels so long ago. 10 spaces on each session.
I think it was 10.
Yeah. And yeah, so students could, we asked students to sign up to, say, a maximum of 2 sessions to start with, and then if there were still spaces available on others, people could then re-sign up to more sessions, just to try and make sure we had enough for everyone to attend at least 1 or 2. But yeah, they were advertised separately and people could sign up for which sessions they were interested in.
That's great. Thank you for answering the HG questions from our group today. And I'd just like to say thank you to everyone who's come along today, and thank you to Laura, Alex, and Rhiannon for sharing their experiences of volunteering in a lockdown and in the second lockdown now as well. We'll be back here in a month's time on December the 8th, where we'll be joined by Rob Jackson, who will be talking about the Engage Journal. We'll also be joined by Kay Thompson, looking at influence. And Rhiannon will be back next month to talk about her talk that she was due to talk about today, but with lockdown, we asked her to talk about the impact of the lockdown on her role. So Rhiannon, recruiting volunteering in a post-COVID world. So thank you to everyone coming along today, and I hope you all have a good month, and hopefully see you as we emerge out of the lockdown, fingers crossed. Have a good few days, everyone. Bye.